Israel and Lebanon on the brink of all-out war.
Israel also struck Beirut for the fourth time since the fighting began almost a year ago. The Israel Defense Forces claimed the target was the head of Hezbollah's missile unit. News reports said he was killed.
Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's message in an address at the UN.
Putin has broken so many international norms and rules that he won't stop on his own. Russia can only be forced into peace.
Sri Lanka's first female prime minister in 24 years is sworn in, and Prince Harry in New York talks about sustainable traveling during Climate Week.
Today is Wednesday, September 25th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint.
Good evening, I'm Steve Karish with Lori London. Joe Biden addressed the UNGA as president for the last time on Tuesday in a parting message to world leaders. The wide-ranging speech covered a lot of ground and, as expected, he urged the world to work together to end conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan, and he touted his administration's work in health and climate mitigation. But it was this line about his decision not to seek re-election that got the most applause from the audience of world leaders.
My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people.
Elsewhere at the UN on Tuesday, the situation in the Middle East, and specifically the rising tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, have leaders worried. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned against what he called politically indefensible and morally intolerable impunity.
And if the cross-border artillery fire between Israel and Hezbollah is heavy on the minds of world leaders meeting in New York, imagine what it's like for people on the ground. As the heavy fighting between Israel and Hezbollah persists, Lebanese officials say more than 550 people have been killed in the strikes. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
Tens of thousands of residents of southern Lebanon have fled their homes since Israel began its airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in the past week. Israel has accused Hezbollah of storing rockets and missiles in civilian areas and has been warning residents to flee. Fatma Ibrahim Shihab was displaced from her home in the Lebanese village of Toul.
They struck right next to our house, and our building was shaking. We got very stressed. This is why we had to leave, and we came here. We were told it's safe here. The situation is very tragic.
Israel also struck Beirut for the fourth time since the fighting began almost a year ago. The Israel Defense Forces claimed the target was the head of Hezbollah's missile unit. News reports said he was killed. Lebanese officials said among the dead in the past 2 days were at least 94 women and 50 children. Israeli officials say Hezbollah has suffered a serious blow in the past week since thousands of pagers belonging to Hezbollah members exploded simultaneously. Retired General Yaakov Amidror is a researcher with the Jewish Institute for National Security of America.
All in all, it's a huge success, eliminating the commanders and the leadership of Hezbollah, hitting very important targets inside Lebanon. But still, we have to be very modest. It's only the beginning. It will take long time to eliminate the capabilities of Hezbollah.
Hezbollah also continued to fire rockets at northern Israel. More than 100 missiles injured a number of Israelis and sent residents running to bomb shelters. Despite the heavy fighting, both sides seem to stop short of a full-scale war. But Amidror notes that Israel wants a buffer zone from the Lebanese border to the Litani River.
If someone from the outside, Americans, the French, whoever, will not have the ability to bring an agreement within which Hezbollah will remain north of the Litani, probably we have to send the ground forces to clean the area from the launching pads of Hezbollah to build kind of security zone in which we will not let Hezbollah members to go in.
International concern is growing that the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah may deteriorate into a full-scale regional war that could force other nations to intervene. Josep Borrell is the European Union's foreign affairs chief.
We need to continue asking for this immediate ceasefire across the blue line, as well as the situation in Gaza. They are not different, they are interlinked, they are strongly interlinked. What's happening in Gaza is triggering other war scenarios.
Speaking at the United Nations today, President Joe Biden said he is determined to prevent regional war and called for a diplomatic solution between Israel and Hezbollah, as well as between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
As we heard from Linda Gradstein in Jerusalem, the escalation of hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel is spiraling, seemingly out of control. Earlier on Wednesday, a missile streak was seen in the sky near Tel Aviv as sirens blared. And while the missile was intercepted by air defense systems after it was detected crossing from Lebanon and there were no reports of damage, it does represent a significant escalation in the recent clashes between Israel and the Iranian-backed Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. David Menser is an Israeli government spokesperson.
This is the first time in history that Hezbollah terrorists have fired at the city of Tel Aviv. Thank God the missile was successfully intercepted by IDF's David's Sling aerial defense system. Immediately following the missile attack, the launcher in southern Lebanon was struck and destroyed. This was a Hezbollah long-range advanced missile fired indiscriminately towards millions of our people.
Hezbollah has fired hundreds of missiles and rockets at Israel in recent days, but this was their first shot at a major city and the first shot into central Israel after months of conflict. Late on Wednesday, the Israeli military's head of the Northern Command told troops that a new phase of the campaign has been entered and soldiers must be prepared for, quote, maneuvering and action, presumably inside Lebanon.
As Hezbollah's conflict with Israel draws Lebanon into war, it's important to remember one thing. Hezbollah is not the government of Lebanon. The Lebanese caretaker government is weak and Hezbollah is strong. And the militant political group, which the U.S. government has classified as a terrorist organization, claims to be defending the interests of all Lebanese people. Jacob Russell in Beirut looks at how much support the group really has among the general population.
Often called a state within a state, Hezbollah has enjoyed significant control of and support from Lebanon's Shiite community for decades. In recent days, Israel has significantly escalated its attacks in Shiite areas of Lebanon, claiming that Hezbollah places its weapons in civilian areas. These attacks have killed hundreds and displaced tens of thousands of non-combatants, a strategy that has the potential to drive a wedge between Hezbollah and its base. Paul Salim is Vice President for International Engagement at the Washington-based Middle East Institute.
The community which supports Hezbollah at the same time does not want to go into another major war, go into much displacement, and it already has. So these are things that Hezbollah has to take into account when making its decisions.
In times of heightened tensions when Israel has invaded in the past, such as during the 2006 war, other sects have rallied around Hezbollah in resistance. But in recent years, Hezbollah's ever-increasing power inside a crisis-riven Lebanon has bred resentment against the group. Salim Mawad is an artist known for his social activism.
Israel is definitely tapping on this wire, like how to widen the schism between the communities in order to build more enmity against Israel.
Whether the attacks turn more people against Hezbollah will depend on how Lebanese political leaders position themselves.
The support of Hezbollah is seasonal. If the political elite of any other sect, then the Shia will decide to support Hezbollah unconditionally, everybody in the community will follow, with the exception of few.
There is no guarantee that attacks that kill Lebanese civilians and force them from their homes will in the end weaken Hezbollah. Paul Salim of the Middle East Institute.
Being attacked by Israel, yes, makes them afraid and desperate, but it also raises their anger and their commitment to not accept this. So the practical side of it is this is not going to change their alignment, but it might and it already is affecting Hezbollah's calculations.
Targeting areas where there are Lebanese civilians is a risky strategy. Analysts say the outcome will depend not only on how far Israel is willing to go, but also on Lebanon's notoriously unpredictable internal politics. Jacob Russell for VOA News, Beirut.
For the first time since Hezbollah began attacking Israel from Lebanon last October, the group fired a ballistic missile towards Tel Aviv on Wednesday. It was intercepted by the Israeli military. Hezbollah has built up a large cache of missiles capable of striking anywhere in Israel in recent years, but has refrained from using them. Our colleague Michael Lippin spoke with Matthew Levitt. He's director of the counterterrorism program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, for insights into why the militant group may have held back.
The first is that the Israelis have prepared the battlefield here with a series of stunning tactical masterstrokes, from the exploding pagers and handheld radios to assassinating key members of Hezbollah's high military command, what they call the Jihad Council, to taking out significant numbers and strategically placed rockets and rocket launchers.
Granted, Israel hasn't claimed responsibility yet for the exploding devices, but it's widely assumed that it was Israel.
And it's been publicly reported that they told the Americans that it was them. But the fact is that what this has done is it was an effort in the moment to try and convince Hezbollah to stop firing rockets into northern Israel and deploy 10 kilometers in the border so that Israeli civilians can go back to their homes in the north. But it also had this secondary effect of actually diminishing Hezbollah's fighting capacity. Hezbollah's ability to shoot small rockets and stuff into Israel daily is the same, but their ability to fight a prolonged, coordinated, full-fledged war, it's not today what it was a week ago. So that's one of the three things that's mitigating this. The second is separate from and more importantly than the political crisis in Lebanon, is the economic crisis in Lebanon, which is very serious and means that the overwhelming majority of Lebanese, really anybody except for the most hardline Hezbollah guys, do not want a war of choice right now. And I don't think that they will circle the wagons around Hezbollah as they did at the last war in 2006. I think people are going to be very angry at Hezbollah for dragging the country into a war at a time that was really not what Lebanon or anybody in Lebanon needs or wants right now. And then finally, the third thing, maybe counterintuitively, because Iran definitely doesn't like Israel and definitely wants it destroyed, Iran does not want Hezbollah to be in a full-fledged war right now that could require the expenditure of a significant number of its rockets. Iran wants the powder dry on the majority of those, at least the precision-guided munitions and long-range rockets, because they see those as the best deterrence against an Israeli or anyone else's attack on their nuclear program after they've been ratcheting up that program for 11 months. They also see it as the best second strike capability should anybody attack that program. So there are multiple priorities going on for Iran, and there's one that's even more important than hitting Israel as hard as possible anytime you can, and that's the nuclear program in the moment. And so Hezbollah finds itself in this conundrum. They want to respond. They don't want to be seen as being defeated and giving in, but they also really don't want full-scale war right now. They know that Lebanon doesn't want full-scale war right now, and they know that even Iran doesn't want full-scale war right now, which I think is why the Israelis think that maybe they're, to use the term they're using, de-escalation through escalation might work. You put enough pressure on them, and not just pressure, but pressure that also at the same time is literally undermining their fighting capacity, taking out their communications, taking out significant numbers of fighters, taking out really entire sections of the military org chart. The majority of the key people on Hezbollah's chief military command, what they call the Jihad Council, are dead.
That was Matthew Levitt at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy speaking with VOA's Michael Lippin.
You're listening to Flashpoint from the Voice of America. I'm Lori London with Steve Karish in Washington. Coming up, what Prince Harry had to say this week.
But first, we turn our attention to Ukraine. We'll start in New York. On Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy used his address to the UN General Assembly to highlight fears of a nuclear incident as his country battles Russian aggression.
Recently, I received yet another alarming report from our intelligence.
Now Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and their infrastructure, aiming to disconnect the plants from the power grid. With the help of satellites, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, satellites of other countries. Russia is getting images and detailed information about the infrastructure of our nuclear power plants. But what does this really threaten? Any missile or drone strike, any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster.
The accusation comes just as Ukrainians are preparing for the third winter of war, with Russian strikes against civilian energy infrastructure becoming a common occurrence.
As of today, Russia has destroyed all our thermal power plants and a large part of our hydroelectric capacity. This is how Putin is preparing for winter, hoping to torment millions of Ukrainians, ordinary families, women, children, ordinary towns, ordinary villages. Putin wants to leave them in the dark and cold this winter.
Sticking with Ukraine, Anna Chernikova in Kyiv has more on Zelensky's address to the United Nations.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke at the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday and said that the war between Russia and Ukraine cannot be calmed by talks alone.
Putin has broken so many international norms and rules that he won't stop on his own. Russia can only be forced into peace. And that is exactly what's needed.
Zelenskyy also mentioned that Ukraine has evidence of Russia's intentions to attack 3 Ukrainian nuclear power plants right before winter in order to create even harder conditions for Ukrainians during cold weather.
Now, as we near the third winter of this war, Russia is once again trying to destroy our energy system, and this fall they are being even more cynical. They are preparing to target our nuclear power plants, 3 of them. We have this information, and we have proof of this.
Russian UN Ambassador Vasily Nebenza said that Western countries could not refrain from poisoning the atmosphere, trying to fill the airtime with the Ukrainian issue. Meanwhile, Russian troops launched another precision-guided bomb attack on the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, hitting a residential building and bread factory. As a result of the attack, 4 people were confirmed killed and more than 30 injured. The rescue operation is ongoing. Russian forces have kept the intensity of the missile and bomb attacks on Kharkiv high for the past year. Mostly, the Russian forces have hit residential areas and facilities with high economic importance and critical infrastructure that covers the needs of people in Kharkiv and Kharkiv region. At the same time, Ukrainian intelligence reported the liberation of the Vovchansk aggregate plant in the Kharkiv region, previously occupied by Russia. According to the intelligence report, the territory of the plant and all 30 buildings of the facility were cleared from the presence of the Russian forces. Currently, the plant is under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. VOA cannot verify this information independently. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
Following his time in New York, President Zelenskyy is planning on going to Washington. However, bad weather in the southern U.S. is keeping Congress's schedule up in the air.
I don't think we're actually going to be in town on Thursday. You have our schedule's changed at 4, so it's very clear. The hurricane coming to the Gulf Coast, so a lot of us people will be dispersed and go back to that. So I'm not sure yet.
That's VOA reporter Katerina Lisanova grabbing a moment with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, in the halls of the U.S. Capitol.
A new school year begins in Russia, a third that's starting with Moscow's war in Ukraine as a backdrop. Elizabeth Chernev narrates this report from Ricardo Marquina about what critics say are Russia's moves to militarize education by introducing new subjects that explain and justify its full-scale assault on Ukraine.
Critics say the education system has been one of the primary targets of Russian militaristic propaganda after the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. The focus is on the youngest, says exiled Russian anthropology professor Alexandra Arkhipova.
Schools are under much more pressure, especially junior schools. The children are being continuously taught to get accustomed to the idea that a war, this is good. A militarization and a militarized public, this is completely correct.
The changes in the curriculum are especially visible in everything related to the history of Russia and its role in the world, as well as its relationship with Ukraine. For example, textbooks claim the so-called, quote, special military operation, as the invasion of Ukraine is known in Russia, was justified and that Russia never shells civilian areas. Controlling the historical narrative is a priority for the Kremlin, says former Russian linguistics professor Svetlana Drugoveko.
History is what shapes the self-consciousness of the nation. That's why it is clear that a great deal depends on what kind of emphasis is made in the textbook.
Critics call it politicization and militarization of education, and they say the directives have put teachers in a difficult situation. Independent organizations outside Russia say that since 2022, 148 teachers have been persecuted for voicing what authorities considered pacifist stances in the classroom. Most lost their jobs. Students and parents still have options to avoid getting caught up in the government's campaign, says a Moscow primary school teacher who asked to remain anonymous.
At the
school, funds are collected periodically to help the soldiers. Parents of children are notified by text message that there will be a collection of aid for the front. But it's up to the parents to participate or not.
But in a country with a long tradition of praising those who fight its wars, experts say no one escapes militarization, not even children. For Ricardo Marquina, Elizabeth Cherneff, VOA News.
Sri Lanka's newly elected president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, on Tuesday swore in opposition leader Harini Amarasarya, a college professor and first-time lawmaker, as his prime minister. It made her the country's first woman to head the government in 24 years. Citizens have mixed feelings, but many are hopeful for change.
We are really happy after she appointed because she's a women prime minister and really proud about that.
Dissanayake, who was declared winner of the election on Sunday, catapulted to power on an anti-corruption platform. Analysts say he faces an uphill task in meeting his commitments to clean up the country's political culture and improving the lives of millions living in poverty since the country's economic collapse 2 years ago.
And Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, joined a 5th anniversary celebration of Travelist during Climate Week in New York City Tuesday. He started the not-for-profit travel organization in 2019 with the goal of getting sustainability information into the hands of travelers.
Through this work, I've seen firsthand how travel and tourism can be a double-edged sword, both a force that has the potential to do tremendous good or, if mismanaged, inflict serious harm.
And noting that the reality of climate change cannot be ignored.
Every year, we break new temperature records. On 22nd of July earlier this year, we experienced the hottest day ever recorded. Dr. Sally Uren's organization, Forum for the Future, shared a report with me that said that somebody born in 2020 is likely to experience 8 times the number of heat waves, 4 times the number of droughts, 3 times the volume of crop failures, and 3 times the number of river floods than a person born in 1960.
The annual Climate Week is putting special emphasis on how to generate money to help poorer countries move away from energy sources that emit greenhouse gases, as well as financial aid needed in those places to deal with the damage the warming is already causing.
And that's going to wrap up today's show. There's more VOA coverage on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of Lori London and everyone here at VOA, thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Steve Karish.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA Podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with the 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.